6:30 is in 2 minutes, but I want to give us some kind of time to think logically about everything.
Sure.
All right. I have. Why is my upload just feels super slow?
Do an audio check.
Yeah, make sure we're coming through. That's a good thing to check.
Are you still uploading?
Yeah, I'm still uploading. I hadn't said anything.
Cool, we're good.
Yeah, I've got
Audio's good.
like I said, I'm running about. I don't know why. I mean, my network is not slow at all today, and for some reason, I'm still only uploading like 60. Of course, that's normally where I'm at. I'm normally somewhere around 6,000 kilobits per second whenever we stream. Just keep in mind, I also have your video feed coming in and my video feed going out to you.
Huh.
So in theory, I'm running 2 video streams to you. Off the same network. I'm running one to Twitch and then I'm running one to you.
Well, what do you pay for as far as upload?
40.
Oh yeah, you're fine.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, even in the worst case of scenarios, things should be good. But what I was getting at before those, no, so like the whole NUCs thing, it cracks me up because like I look at that and I go, okay, if it's NUCs, I want to see how this is really playing out and whatnot. And the thought process that I've had, especially with you recently thinking about like Rocket Lake and Tiger Lake H, is that I think NUCs, at least I think in the future, from a consumer CPU standpoint of view, I think consumer CPUs from Intel, like the Alder Lake setups, you might see them push core counts really, really hard eventually in those. And then you might see the NUCs get the laptop parts, which are going to start being more powerful anyways. I mean, it's very simply put. A Alder Lake NUC should be able to compete with like a 5900X. Yeah, desktop part. Not 5900H, 5900X desktop part. Like just the theoretical thought about that. All right. Well, welcome to Don't Call Me for IT Support, episode 6. We are live. We have been for about 4 minutes now. So if you can hear us or can't hear us, it is what it is. Welcome to the show. I'm Brad. He's Chris. This is episode 6. This is what we're talking about today is AMD Workstation GPUs, and Intel Ice Lake makes it to desktops. So it's a kind of side banter of a story for me, but it's something that I think is going to impress some people, and it's something definitely worthwhile to discuss. This is a very workstation and work tech focused podcast, so that's why Ice Lake, as long as it was on laptops for a year, in 10th gen for a year, it's never been on desktops, and now it is in the workstation format. So it's something we ought to talk about. Xeon W has arrived, and it is a leap and bound over good old-fashioned Cascade Lake. You actually can get up to 10 more cores from Cascade Lake, 38 versus 28, which is a major performance improvement just in Intel's book. But there are some cost comparisons we need to go over. There are some features that Xeon Scalable and Xeon W, for that matter of fact, kind of bring to the table that aren't in Are in Threadripper Pro from a workstation single CPU setup. And that's where I kind of wanted to have this conversation and see what everyone thought about it and see how where things went. All that being said, we're going to start off first with something a little bit different, and start with some of the news topics that are out there from the recent past. One of which is
Ryzen
processors
Windows 11.
get slowed down in up to 15% in Windows 11. And that this is it. So this article comes from Engadget, where AMD is, stating that they're working on fixing these issues. I would imagine, if anything, because Windows 11 is brand new and it's got a brand new scheduling piece of software inside of it, that has something to do with it, folks. The way it's scheduling CPUs is now different because Intel worked directly with Windows for big little designs. So I'm sure there's some kind of reasoning that the big little processing has arrived. Maybe what it's doing, Chris, and purely speculative here, maybe something that we're forgetting about and something that it's doing is it's actually going in and seeing the separate chiplets as a big little architecture difference. And so rather than utilizing cores properly, I'm speaking out loud. It's purely pulling this out of my butt. But maybe there's something to it. I mean, I don't know. I don't think any of us really know ourselves or how it's going to be and what it's going to do. But I figure it's at least a worthwhile conversation piece. Oh, mercy. So that's part one. More on this. Basically, AMD has come back and said, yes, we're going to fix this. Yes, this is something we're going to be able to work on and get done soon. There's going to be a Windows patch for it, and that there will be some new drivers that might have to be manually installed. So, generally speaking, there is some things that are going to have to be done with association to this because of the bug that, like I said, it's probably in software and driver related and so on and so forth. Shocking to me, though, new Windows operating system comes out and it's buggy for AMD, and they're not talking about bugs for Intel yet. Shocking. I'll prepare my shocked face for everyone out there. Ta-da! Yeah, for you that want to see the big... Yeah, this is the shocked face. I don't think it's very shocking, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think so. Okay, so second up on the list in the rundown tonight, I kind of had to say it this way: EVGA crossing over to the AMD Dark Side. That was funny to me. The AMD Dark Side. So the second article we've got today is one by a non-tech, but it's talking about the review of the EVGA X570 Dark, which is a motherboard for AMD processors. I don't know how many of you know this, but EVGA was almost exclusively an Intel and Nvidia camp for years.
Yeah.
I remember they used to make AMD products way back in the day.
How far back?
Phenom days.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Okay, that's old.
Yeah, we're talking like, the mid 2000s, pre-Bulldozer, basically. Pre-Bulldozer. And so it's been over 10 years since they've made an AMD product. I'm pretty.
Is that pre-Core?
Phenom and Core existed in conjunction.
Okay.
The original Core, so you had Phenom was the original. Then the Phenom 2 came out, and when Phenom 2 came out, that was when Core was released. So Core 2 Duo was out when the original Phenom was released, and it was crazy because you could get the Core 2 Quad, which always blew my mind. Core 2, yeah. You had the Core 2 Quad, and then you had the Phenom 2 X4, which is a quad core CPU as well. Then, back when, like I said, it's like 2006, 2007 time frame. Actually, the first PC I ever built, which discouraged me heavily from AMD PCs for years, was an AMD Phenom 2 X4 Black Edition. It was, for all intents and purposes, it should have been a great CPU. It just sucked on Windows. And I hate that. Going back now, it's a great. I mean, AMD makes great products. They always have. They've always made something great, whether it be they made good graphics cards while their CPUs were in a down spiral. And I say all this to backtrack and say it this way: when you really, really, really think about AMD products, they were never bad enough to just get you through a normal day. Like if you had an AMD desktop processor, you could very much go about just like anybody else, as long as you weren't gaming heavily or doing anything like that. You could use a AMD product and get on the internet and browse Facebook and go to all the websites that you needed to go to. You just weren't going to run complex tasks on it without tearing through power and wattage and all that stuff. Matter of fact, my
Right.
father has a AMD laptop from probably 6 years ago that's still rocking. I mean, it's on Windows 10 too. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's a
can see it.
it's a good little laptop. It's an AMD. Like I said, I mean, it had to be. It was probably bulldozer esque. But I mean, like I said, for what he uses it for, which is literally checking the internet, doing
It's
doing
totally
an
fine.
doing non-complex Excel spreadsheets, non-complex Word documents, writing up Word documents, creating a PowerPoint, little things. We're not talking about like heavy duty stuff. Their
That's right.
products have always been good for that, guys. So it's just people sitting back and getting mad that, well, Intel was a better gaming CPU. Well, whoop de freaking do. I mean, and the same thing goes for right now. Everybody wants to say, well, AMD is the best gaming CPU. You know what? If I find an i3 laptop that my friend needs because all they need to do is be able to get on the internet and go, like, keep in mind what is the purpose of this machine. Price to performance is always the way you have to look at things. So what's the purpose? But I say all that to say that EVGA has returned to the dark side of the moon with AMD. I'm going to use as many crazy, funny puns on this as I possibly can.
Do it.
It'll be a dark day in hell when EVGA stops working for AMD again, I'm sure too. But all that being said, they do have a new board out. It is an EVGA Dark board, which is the overclocker's dream, as they always say, for AM4. It's kind of shocking to me as it's the last board. It does. This is the funny thing to me. So it does support two DDR4 4800 DIMMs, which, if you didn't know, is DDR5 4800 is coming out here in a few days, a few weeks, whatever you want to say. And that's the pretty much bottom standard for DDR5. Everyone always forgets DDR3 had like DDR3 3200 megahertz DIMMs way back in the day. I mean, granted, they were only 8 gig DIMMs, but they had those DIMMs. They were there. They existed. They were way back. I feel like something. No, but they were there. And now we're getting to the point where these DDR4 DIMMs are pushing DDR5 speeds. But just like anything else, DDR5 is right around the corner, and it's going to be the slowest versions of them. Which, what is that? What is the D? All right, we're gonna scroll down memory lane because this is what we like to do on the show here, guys. DDR5.
Go down tangents.
Yep, tangent. We're riding the tangent rabbit this morning or this afternoon, this evening, whatever we want to say. So the DDR5 specs, the minimum speed. How do I go back? So the official memory spec is from 4800 to 6400 megatransfers per second.
Sure. I think it's quick.
Yeah. That's going to be... So basically...
DDR4 was what?
2133? Let me see. Let me see. What was the JDEC spec? DDR4 spec. I think 3200 was technically the spec top, but you could always push past that.
Yeah.
1600.
That's the base spec for DDR4?
The base DDR4 spec was a frequency with a 1.2 voltage, was a frequency of 800 to 1600 megahertz. Now double that for your speeds. So 1600 mega transfers to 3200 mega transfers. Megahertz, mega transfers, however you want to look at it, but it's double data rate.
Yeah.
So DDR3 was 800 through 2133. So there's always some overlap, guys. And the spec obviously has updated a little bit. Obviously, DDR4 can go faster with more voltage. DDR3 had a higher voltage requirement to hit that top spec. The low voltage version did not hit that high. And DDR4 can hit up to 4800 or 5000, obviously with slightly higher voltages. That 1.2 volts, though, that you're going to see is your reference voltage, and that's going to be the DDR5 setup, which is going to give us a starting place of about 4,800 megatransfers a second. So that's going to be impressive. I'll say this much: one, so everyone, and you and I were talking about this earlier, Chris. We were talking about RAM. DDR5. I know we took a tangent on our dark motherboard, and we're coming back to that. But DDR5 so one of the things that AMD has a disadvantage of, because it uses the mesh. It uses a mesh network instead of using like a ring bus like Intel does, or instead of ring bus or a mesh bus that Intel does. Their Infinity Fabric that they use, typically you want to be clocked as close as possible to the DDR frequency. So when they clock up to DDR5, when they make the step up to DDR5, which we don't know when that's going to be, it may be the next gen Zen 4, but it probably, if it's not Zen 4, it's Zen 5. I would say this much though: if 4800 is the bottom clock, that makes sense for them to push waiting on moving Zen to Zen 5, because right now it's 3200. With Zen 2 and Zen 3, it was 3200 megatransfers per second that they wanted to match to. So that's a big step from 3.2, luckily, 3.2 gigahertz cycles, however you want to look at it, up to 4.8. That's a huge step up on that mesh of the Infinity Fabric. That's going to be a very, very, there's going to be a lot of latency between the two if they're not on the same clock cycle. So that might be that almost makes a dang good reason for Zen 4 to wait for DDR5 and hit it at Zen 5, because they've got to step up to like DDR4 3800 or something like that would be the one that you'd think they'd push for, or 3600, something like that. It also would make sense to me though why they've delayed so far, and we've heard everywhere from everything that at some point we're going to see a Threadripper Pro and a whatnot that are on Zen 3, because we don't have one yet. We don't have anything Zen 3 for Threadripper. So if we do see that, it would make sense why they might skip Zen 4 and go straight to Zen 5 with those chips, because if they're trying to aligning those clock cycles, there's no point to be that far behind, especially when Intel's pushing DDR5 so far. And I don't think you're ever going to see ECC RAM at like 3800 megatransfers in DDR4. Like that was like they've hit the spec. They've hit 3200 megatransfers a second. You're never going to go faster than that. So why would you make a Zen 4 Threadripper that needs 3800, that the Infinity Fabric needs 3800 megatransfers, and you can't get that from ECC RAM? The Threadripper Pro that gets that, I can see it. I'm logic is occurring in my brain here, guys. I'm just thinking things out loud. The Dark board, however, it is nice. It does have dual PCI 4.0 M.2 slots. It does have 8 SATAs. Why you need 8 SATAs on a Dark board, I'll never know. It does support Wi-Fi 6, and it does have dual 2.5 gigabit Ethernet slots on it. It's like I said, it's an overclocker's dream, guys. It's just back to the fact that AMD is finally won over enough of the hardcore market to convince EVGA to cross back over to the dark side and create AMD boards. So, which is a good thing. It's competition. Brings competition. Yep. We always like competition. The next article we have on our list and thing to kind of look over is and talk about, keep in mind this is workstation focus. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about workstations is you have stuff like Chris builds, like what he has in his background there. It's a very pretty background, Chris. But you have that kind of that stuff that Chris builds in his background there, and it's quite cute. But it's powerful, large machines using desktop level components that are not power sipping per se. They're we don't mind if they use a little bit of extra power, right? Not a problem for us. So that being said, we've got that as an option. Hey, Ella. So that is an option. Now, the flip side to that, and that's what I was saying, the next part of this little topic for us for a discussion is NUCs, next unit of computing. And I'm bringing this up because there was a great article on AnonTech, and if you want to take a look at it, you've got the rundown to look at. You can take a read and see and enjoy all that is the NUC from AMD with a R7 4800U. And it's an AMD NUC. Intel makes NUCs too. Not really a NUC though, per se. Intel calls them NUCs. AMD, they're just small form factor PCs that use laptop parts, right?
Yeah.
So the nice thing about this, and this is something that Chris and I have kind of talked about for several months back and forth, you've got the NUC form factor. I don't know if you guys have seen. All right, I got to bring them up because I got to show you the number that we used to buy. These little small form factor client PCs, thin clients, whatever you want to call them, thin and zeros. These little small looking things. And it's not exactly what I'm talking about, but they're very similar. So it's basically a small desktop.
Oh.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The small desktops that run what they run is they run the
virtual desktop.
Well, they're virtual desktops to a lot of them. But for us, what we did was we built them and they were full on desktops. So they had i5 chips in them. So, but they were i5 desktop chips with SODIMM memory. So my thought process has already been in the back of my head. Why not just go ahead and move these to that NUC form factor? Since you're already going in that form factor direction, start moving in with like the 11th gen NUCs and then the 10th and then the Ryzen 5000 series NUCs and replacing them that way. I mean, imagine if you had a bunch of these as opposed to full-on desktops for people. Because prior to this, and I always remember this, so the company that I work for, that I do my full-time job for, as much as I wish this was a full-time job for me and Chris, it's not. As much as I wish Chris could hire me full-time, that's probably never going to happen either. But I make jokes, guys, jokes all the day. So that being said, though, these little boxes, they're pretty powerful. I mean, Intel and AMD both can put 8 core parts in there now. And prior to buying this, you were talking about going, and I've got to go to eBay to find them. Do you remember those Lenovo M91Ps?
Not ringing the bell.
93P, that's what it was.
What? Siri.
Nope. These were the former small form factors. You got a cat that loves you. I got a dog that's walking over here too. It's okay. Kitty! Attack kitty. Assault kitty. It's okay. Your cat sees my dog on screen. That's probably why. She kept seeing her wandering in the background. But you see these things, right, Chris? You've seen these before.
Yeah.
They used to be, I mean, for our age, I think of the old Dell Optiplexes that used to be in schools everywhere. You remember those?
Oh, yeah.
They had the little door that opened up on the front to get to the headphone jack so that you could listen to stuff quietly and teachers wouldn't yell at you on watching YouTube and stuff. Yeah, I remember those. Back in that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago, guys. But yeah, these, for lack of a better word, used to be what corporations everywhere ordered for your desktop because they were the smallest thing you can get. Now, all of a sudden, we can get these little thin clients, and I'm actually gonna go to Dell's version of one. Dell still has something called an Optiplex desktop, and I have to look at it. It's what they are now, the Optiplex micros. So yeah, this is the one I'm talking about. It's still called Optiplex. But and once again, they still use the full Intel FAT parts. They're not like they're the T's, the T parts, so they're thermally capped. But it's still the same setup. I mean, at Micro 35 supports up to 10 core processors. That doesn't make any sense to me. No, because the 11 series doesn't have 10 cores. I'm guessing that they're saying that you could configure it with a 10 core part because you could get it with the 10th gen part. Because once again, it can come with the big part. All that being said, though, imagine if it was just this with the 11500H, the 6-core laptop part. Which, oh, by the way, is 35 watts or less. It's not the big part. It's not a piece of garbage Rocket Lake part. Or, better yet, use the AMD parts. I mean, go with the 5900H. Or 5600H. That's the one. 6-core.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's 57 6-core, something like that. I don't know. Either or, though. You could get a 6-core part from AMD. You could get a 6-core part from Intel. All that run on the laptop SKUs. I mean, I truly think these Optiplex designs where you're using fat, big cores in them. I bring this thing back up. I'm going to show it to you again and remind you of it just because I think it's funny, Chris. Sorry, my dog is in the background playing with her toy. Thank you, Ella, for being entertaining. So, do you remember this thing I showed you last week? It's the little Intel.
That's the compute stick.
Yep.
Yep.
The Core M5 that I have. Remember this thing, guys? So you could very easily use, and I put a Mushkin sticker on it because I didn't want it on my desk. But yeah, I mean, you could very easily build a laptop, or not a laptop, a computer like that. Imagine if this thing had the lightweight. I'm going to go down the ARC line. We're talking NUCs again. So we're talking like next generation, basically people that don't come to you, Chris, for desktops, because they don't, like I said, that minimalistic design. You don't need so much of everything. So that minimalistic design we're talking about. So go to, where was I going with this? The ARC. I want to go to the Intel page. I'm going to go to the Intel page, and then I'm also going to go to the AMD page because I want to show you the same kind of setup. So core processors, we're going to look at the 11th gen Core i5 because I think that's the right place to go. All right, so the Core i5 gets the 11300H. So that's a 4-core part. Okay, so that's not quite the greatest thing you want to do. But you know what? Most companies would probably buy the i7 anyways. I also beg to say that the i5 11300H is probably better than the 11400T on all kinds of levels. I just want to see if there's a better one. 60H. Okay, I'm an idiot. They do. They have an 11500H. It's a 6-core part. It is Tiger Lake. They have an 11500H. All right. It's a 6-core part. It's got 12 threads. It's got a 2.9 gigahertz base. Oh my God, it's got a 35 watt TDP, 2.4 gigahertz.
Say what?
It has a 35 watt TDP part. All right, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. I'll share it again. So they've got a 35 watt part here. that starts at 2.4 gigahertz. It's 6 cores, it's 12 threads, it's 12 megabytes. I'm going to add this to compare. I'm going to back up. I'm going to go and select the 11500T that we were just looking at. It too has 12 megabytes of smart cache, but it also has a 1.5 gigahertz TDP up to 390. All right, the 500H versus the 500T. All right, H versus T here. We're talking same parts. Let me validate. It's the 11500. It is the 11500. All right, I'm going to compare the two. Ta-da! It's got a 35 watt TDP that can be configurable for 2. And it starts at that 45 watt TDP. At that 35 watt TDP, starts at 2.4 gigahertz versus the T that starts at 1.5. Both versions get a turbo frequency. So the Tiger Lake part gets a turbo frequency of 4.6 gigahertz. The Rocket Lake part gets 3.9.
4.6, holy crap.
That's what I'm saying.
That beats the pants off of this Asus PN50 that's on the rundown.
And the PN50 Tiger Lake's going to beat the pants off of it, guys. I've been trying to tell people that. It's also the 4000 series, not a 5000 series. So I don't want to give a true comparison.
True.
All that being said, though, Tiger Lake will beat the pants off of Ryzen 5000 regardless. It's in the mobile SKU.
Right.
But that's the point in what we're talking about. These mobile parts for the wattage requirements. So if you've got a 11500H at the same TDP as an 11500T, you're getting way more performance. I mean, that's 25. No, it's probably 15 to 20% more performance in clock speed alone, not to mention the fact that it's got an IPC advantage and a energy efficiency advantage just from the sheer fact of it. So look at the other thing, the base frequency. The 11500T base frequency is 1.5 gigahertz at 35 watts. The 11500H at 35 watts is 2.4 gigahertz. That's a whole 900 megahertz faster base clock. That just shows you how much more energy efficient 10 nanometer was.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you gotta think about all the chips and how they fall out. Now, the next article, well, we're still talking about it NUCs, but the next article kind of will tie into this too. So one of the things that I always think about is, and I don't know about you, Chris, but when it comes to data transfer right now, the 3 options you have when you transfer data, especially if you were using one of these NUCs and trying to like upload files, you can either go to the cloud, use like OneDrive, which sometimes works and somewhat efficient. You can go to the USB, which sometimes is effective. You can go and prior to that, and also with this, you could have gone to like network share or LAN transfer. Basically, use your network, your NIC, and transfer it that way.
Mm.
None of those solutions were very fast. And prior to this, I never really would have considered this transfer format because the last time you used an SD card to move files, you probably were getting 20 to 30 megabytes a second tops.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
It's really bad. Well, no more. Well, when I say 25 to 35 megabytes, that's not megabytes a second. That's like 2 to 3 megabytes a second, which is not good. 20 to 30 megabit per second reads and writes. That's terrible. Well, our next article is a review from AnandTech of SD over NVMe. So NVMe SD cards, basically. I used the article mainly because. What? Are you reading it now?
I'm reading it now. Holy crap, that is fast.
I love it. I love it when Chris waits to read stuff till the middle of the show. I love seeing his on-demand reactions to them. It's perfect, y'all. It's perfect.
Now, it's not a desktop NVMe drive. Let's be real.
Oh God.
What?
Okay, let's also be realistic about desktop NVMe drives. So one of our other topics in tonight's Next thing is, reality versus expectation, guys. I have tons of NVMe drives, tons of them. I have tons of SATA SSDs, and I also have tons of regular hard drives. All right. I will show you once again, for all of the viewing pleasure of our audience, I will show you what my PC number of drives. I have network drives. I have drives on the network that are other NVMe drives. But this should give you an idea. I got a lot of drives. And I'll go ahead and tell you, not a single one of these drives, okay, only one drive on this desktop right now is a single drive non-rated. There's only one drive. I'm not going to let you guess. I don't want you to guess. But there's only one drive on here that's not a rated drive. All right? So let's backtrack and start with that. Non-rated hard drives these days, guys, walk away from them. You don't need a hard drives are so efficient and so unlikely to break these days. Just rate them in RAID 0. If you need to back them up properly on a regular basis. But you have no reason to try to explain to me that you need to have two drives in RAID 5 and RAID 1. That's worthless to you. You gain no performance benefits for RAID 1. Now, if you want to do RAID 10, thumbs up. It's nice. I like it. Yes, RAID 10 is a good thing. But expectations versus reality. I have yet to see, and I transfer massive file sizes here, guys. Massive file sizes. And I have yet to see a theoretical peak hit on any drive other than an Optane drive. And I'm talking like the Optane in an NVMe slot Optane drive, or Optane in a PCI Express slot Optane drive.
It's super expensive one.
There's no performance that compares to that. It's the fastest drive I've gotten. You know the fastest speed I've ever seen out of it? About 2,500 megabytes per second. Which would be, about 250 megabytes a second, which would be about 2,500 megabits per second, which is the advertised speed, guys. Which is which is less than the advertised speed of 3,600 megabits per second. So let's be realistic here, guys. You're not gonna get these theoretical peaks everywhere. If I've got a compact, I've got some of the fastest. I'll show you this one too. This, by the way, this is by far my favorite recent purchase, Chris. Can you see it?
A little bit. What is that?
It's a SanDisk NVMe based USB 3.2 Gen 2 card. Gen 2, not card, USB drive. So it's got up to 20 megabyte per second read writes, 20 megabit or 200 megabit per second. 2 gigabit per second read writes on a USB device, because 2 gigabit per second is as fast as you can get that. Not 2 gig, 20 gigabit. Why am I saying 2? I can't. My mind is all over the place.
Yes. I didn't know that existed.
20 gigabits per second is the Gen 2. 10 gigabit per second is Gen 3.1 Gen 1. The 3.2 Gen 2 is 2 by, they say 2 by 2 because it's basically it's 2 10 gigabit lanes. I don't have that capacity though. All right. I don't have that capacity on my board. I've only got a Gen 1 10 gigabit port. I cannot peak this out, guys. I cannot. There is no storage method that there's out there right now that is going to hit the theoretical peaks. Computers have not caught up to that, to the spec. And I would suffice to say they probably won't for several years. I mean, SATA 6 is SATA 6 gigabit. So, I mean, I rarely find times when 2 SATA SSDs rated are slower than a 970 Pro. Like in generic use cases. A single 970.
Software just hasn't caught up yet.
Agree. I would go to say that the OSs haven't caught up. I don't know. I mean, maybe if you're working in command line and telling something to do something in command line, it'll go faster. But
Like we spec mainly NVMe because there's less cables and it's a little bit easier to install, and prices are about the same these days. But speeds, they're really the same. Like real world, which we're gonna get to.
Yeah, we're gonna get to it because I want you to save your comments right now for our marketing fluff versus reality. But this is cool because this is another way to remotely transfer stuff over the PCI Express bus, which to me is truly where we should have been going for years with transfers. Throw that down, Brad. It's really where we should have been going. I mean, we should have been doing this, over PCI Express transfer stuff. I mean, that should have been happening for a long time, y'all. But I say all that to say that AnandTech has a great review of these PCI Express NVMe cards. Now, it's called SD Card Express. It is a new name. If you're looking here at the picture, and I've got an SD card right beside me, so let me show you the difference. So you see how the SD card's set up in the picture, Chris? Can you see that on screen?
I'm looking at in Teams or on Twitch.
On Twitch. You see that picture on Twitch?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm going to pull off of that. So you see what that SD card looks like, guys. I'm going to pull back to the me and Chris view and show you what an SD card looks like. Now you can see it on Teams, Chris. You see the differences? You see the two differences there?
There's some chips on the bottom.
It's the number of pinouts on the bottom there, guys.
Yep.
And I'll bring it up closer to the camera for y'all now again. Look at the pinout differences. You can see that if you look at my screen, you look at my picture right now, you can see the SD card. There's more pins that allow for more power transfer.
Yep.
Which means, once again, ta-da, faster speeds.
Faster.
Ooh, when's the where's that sound that we always love from I gotta find it. Yeah, I know where it's at. I just gotta go pull it up, and I want people to listen to it because it makes me crack up.
Good Lord. This thing's hitting 890 meg read.
I'm telling you, talk about it some while I'm pulling this up.
Holy cow. 890 meg read. That's on the highest depth. Lowest depth. Wait. Performance is kind of all over the place, but strange.
Yeah, it always makes that whenever you see and hear about something like that, it always makes me think of Toy Story and this sound.
Greetings, I am Buzz Lightyear. I come in peace.
That's what that makes me think of. You might not have heard it, but yeah, I'm sorry, that Toy Story clip always gets me every time. But going back to the NVMe stuff, yeah, like it's super, like 860 sequential read writes, 860 reads, 750 writes, megabyte. That's in megabytes, y'all, not megabits. That's approaching like what I'm seeing.
So it looks like it. So it looks like it looks like it has an SLC cache or a single level cell of around 5.5 gigs. At which, after the point, it really starts to drop off.
Of course.
Which makes total sense. All SSDs have some sort of cache.
And most of it's DDR cache, by the way.
Yeah. Some NVMe SSDs, who we will not name it, do not have said cache, and their performance is terrible.
Facts. But at the same time, guys, think about it this way. Ultimately, performance may vary. And if we've got something else that's got a competitor to USB finally, I mean, this is this SanDisk drive that I was showing you. I mean, we're talking about the theoretical peak that I get out of this thing, out of this SanDisk drive. And that's a lot, y'all. That's a lot of performance. So, I mean, we need to really think about that ourselves. All that being said, it does have TLC and QLC available to it. It does have an SLC cache, like he was talking about, which I think is smarter because you can actually, the way that people are starting to develop these QLC drives is that they're able to convert a QLC cell into 4 separate SLC drives. So in theory, basically what they're doing is that each cell has, the way you program each QLC drive is the way, when you write to it, it's written like SLC, but it stacks up. So when the further you write, the higher up it gets. All right. That is what it is, guys. It's no big deal. No, I mean, and you can reprogram these QLC cells to write as SLC and then go rewrite themselves QLC later. So to do that on drive makes a lot of sense. And the one thing about NAND flash and SD cards and stuff like that, so I showed you an SD card itself, but the micro ones, these little micro cards, that's 90% of what I use. And they make these micro cards up to 1 terabyte in storage size. I mean, they're the same size. The micro cards are the ones that you can put in like your cell phone. You know, they're about the size of a SIM card. You know, would seem to me that would make a lot of sense, though, to be able to get some. I mean, so to write and create something that large and at that capacity, what do you have to do, guys? You have to shrink the nodes more and more. So they're going to be more node advantaged. And also, if you didn't read the SD 7.1 key features there, Chris, they're only using PCI Gen 3 by 1 or by 2.
Yeah, I saw that.
So it's not like they're even using, true NVMe by 4 capabilities. Imagine what happens when they get to that point when they can use by 4 capabilities. But once again, like you just mentioned, once you fill that cache up, everything slows down. That's exactly how big NVMe drives occur. And the reason I tell people I never see that full performance advantage is because most of the files I'm transferring are several hundred gigabytes.
And they just completely erode the cache in like a half second.
Yeah, the cache gets filled up, and guess what? I am right down to my standard, 800, 900 megabytes a second, maybe 1,000 megabytes a second read speed on the best of devices.
I'm looking at extended workloads. I'm a little bit farther into the article. Yep. I've exploded all of the tests, and I mean, when the cache is gone, it craters, but everything does that.
Yep. I'm gonna let you keep talking for a second, Chris. I'm gonna get some water real fast. I'll be right back.
Cool.
Explain this more, because I mean they need to know. I mean, SD Express is gonna be powerful.
So I mean, it's giving NVMe to a bigger audience, which up until now didn't have this faster storage tech, and it makes it a lot more easy to use, or a lot more applicable to laptops and stuff that can't easily use a full size drive, whether it's a full size M2 or a SATA SSD. But we keep talking about the cache. Every NAND drive, whether it's an SSD or an NVMe drive, has some sort of cache. So when that cache is gone, it goes away. But it looks to be a really neat little drive. I'm liking what I see here.
All right. Have you told him enough about it?
I think so.
Or do you feel like that? All right. So the next topic that we've got tonight is part of our title story, talking about Ice Lake finally being on desktops. And actually, Chris is going to get to talk an awful lot about this because Chris has been working with me on some developmental stuff for quite a while. We're trying to put together, a machine that makes sense. And so what Chris has been doing though is he's been looking at motherboards and ways to assemble something like this using Threadripper Pro or now Ice Lake Xeon. Specifically focusing on Xeon W because, 2 Ice Lake chips versus 1. There's perks to everything and however you look at it. So while he's doing that, I'm going to bring up some of the other stuff that we looked at. But
so
I'll let you start to cover some of the general feature differences.
One of the biggest differences, in my opinion, between Threadripper Pro and Ice Lake is Threadripper Pro only has 8 RAM slots, up to 8 RAM slots. It is 8 channel, but it's 1 DIMM per channel.
You can hide that sound, by the way.
Well, I know that I can hide it on Teams. It's just I can't hide it from myself.
Yeah, that's true. It's good though. It's not bothering me. Keep talking.
And what Ice Lake is 8 channels and up to 2 DIMMs per channel, which means that if you're doing stuff that requires a lot of RAM, and I'm not talking like 128 gigs, I'm talking like 500 between 500 gigs and 4 terabytes. Then if you're using Ice Lake, you don't have to use the 256 gig DIMMs, which are 4 times the price of a 128 gig DIMM. So it would make sense for a 256 to be twice as expensive as a 128. That would make sense. It's not. It's 4 times more expensive. So that's a problem. So if you can save literally half the cost on the RAM if you go to Ice Lake. Depending on what you're doing, you may need the extra cores on Threadripper Pro, and that would be something that we talk about. But that's probably the biggest thing, in my opinion, is the RAM.
Well, let's also bring into discussion a little bit here. So you got RAM. You've also got to think about the boards. So Threadripper Pro has an awful lot more manufacturers making them right now. As far as I can tell, so that's a pretty big difference. So TR Pro, that means that with TR Pro you can get Asus, Supermicro.
Asus, I think they have the same because Ice Lake, I've seen Supermicro.
I haven't seen an Asus board from Ice Lake.
I think Asus said that they weren't going to make Ice Lake because it's so short term.
And so that's a lot of it. So right now, what a lot of people are forgetting is that Ice Lake is it's a very short socketed board. I think that's something that everybody should know. Everybody should be aware of. It's not going to last very long. That's just the truth.
I think there's only 2 OEMs for Ice Lake that I know of. There's Supermicro and Gigabyte.
Yep, and that doesn't surprise me.
And there's 3, I think, for Threadripper Pro.
I'm trying to find STRX 80. The STRX 80 in this socket. Do you remember what the actual call out for TR Pro was?
WRX. So it's WRX.
Yeah, but the TRX, the socket.
Socket WRX.
Yeah, it's WRX 80 though, I believe. But I'm trying to remember what the actual board. Yeah, it's the chipset's WRX 80. Socket's SP3.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was looking for, was SP3.
So many terms.
socket SP3. There's actually 70 manufacturers for 70 boards on Newegg right now for Threadripper Pro, which is nice.
Wow.
I'm trying to pull up a similar design for both of them though, so we can look at them. Supermicro is just constantly showing you like a, what do you call it, a combo for their board. But they're, everybody that makes them, and I'll bring up Gigabytes. Gigabytes is a good way to look at it because they're the same, pretty much as everybody else. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show my screen now. Drag these side by side so everybody can see them. No, I want you to go there. One. I want you to come down and go over here. Two. These two side by side. So here we go. We got a Supermicro board right beside a Gigabyte board. All right. If I click on the actual board so that you can just look at the board, zoom into them, you kind of see the first thing that you'll notice, in my opinion, is that the Gigabyte board, which is basically the same layout as the same Supermicro board from for the same WRX80 chipset. So, but if you look at this and you look at the layout of them, it's ridiculous that it won't let me zoom in the way I want to, but that's fine. One of the big things that I notice, and I'll see if you notice it too, Chris, number of NVMe slots.
Looks like Supermicro. Well, so the Supermicro is the Ice Lake board.
Yep.
I know this. That's quite obvious. It has, I believe it has 4 NVMe's on board. Yep.
Correct.
And the Gigabyte,
I'll zoom into this area so you can kind of look.
Probably has 2 or 3.
I don't know if this is a heatsink for one or not, or a VRM heatsink. I'm pretty sure it's just got 2.
Yeah, I would. That's probably a VRM,
which is pretty standard. I mean, I'm not so hurt about that. The one thing that I noticed that is kind of nice is it looks like, trying to look for it. So here's your power.
Looks like it has some U.2 on there.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's got some U.2s on it. I'm looking for where they're at. It's definitely got more. I mean, it's got both of them are going to have networking out the butthole. Both of them are going to have 10 gig on board, which is nice. All right. Going down to their feature set, so scroll down here and we'll look at them. So the specs of this thing, obviously you're going to have you've got 10 gig on a Marvell chipset. You've got the Intel i210AT, which is a dual gigabit port. And you've got a third LAN chipset, which is a dedicated IPMI port on the Ice Lake. On Threadripper Pro, you have to look at the overview to see it. You've got where do we go to?
Unhelpful.
Yeah. Well, see, here's what kills me though. All right, I'm gonna say this because it's gonna make me mad when you hear me say this. Nobody claims to support more than 512 gigs on these boards because they support the max RDIMM memory is 64 gigs. 64 times 8 is 512.
But AMD
claims it supports 2 terabytes.
With
the CPU probably does, but no one will basically. And this is, I think this might be something that just happens in general with workstation boards, unless you're a major manufacturer like Supermicro that does primarily server boards too. Gigabyte doesn't do server boards, so why would any of them go and physically certify 128 and 256 gig DIMMs, especially when you and I, Chris, know the cost of those DIMMs?
Yeah. I mean, Gigabyte does have a server group, but
what I'm getting at is, though, certifying 256 gig DIMMs, 8 256 gig DIMMs, just to have that on board to certify them is expensive. Chris remembers. I mean, we've looked at this. Threadripper Pro basically when it comes to these larger, workstations that need memory, and one of those topics we're going to cover at the end of the night, before we're all said and done, is certain software sets that need large capacity and large amounts of RAM. And the reason I specifically wanted to kind of get into this somewhat in some of these conversations is when you think about hardware, unless you're running certain software on a physical server, guys, you're not running. You're just not doing. That's the thing. Unless you're running on that physical server, it's just not the same, guys. And so the whole point to bring this up to you and talk about what's the difference between an Ice Lake board now that's available to you and a Threadripper Pro board is Threadripper Pro sure offers more cores than Ice Lake Xeon W. All right, it's 38 cores versus 64 cores. However, if you price them out, both of the 32 cores cost about the same. Now, if you can put 2 terabytes of RAM in the 32 gig board for half the cost of 2 terabytes of RAM in the Threadripper Pro board, all of a sudden now having 64 cores kind of gets to be an interesting conversation, right? And that's that thing that you guys really got to think about is, where are we going with things? If you need that RAM, somehow, some way, Intel all of a sudden is convincing people to put 16 DIMMs on a single socket board. Like, that's something I haven't seen in a long time. And that's just personal experience.
Dude, Asus had a dual socket scalable that you could do 12 DIMMs.
Yeah, I mean, and that's dual socket though. Keep in mind, guys.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
That's a whole different thought process because you can get 16 DIMMs on a dual socket Epic board. But what we're comparing here is Threadripper Pro to Intel, which is to Ice Lake because of their clock speed improvements.
Right.
So you're only single socket and you're getting a higher clock speed. And the more cores you have with the more clock speed like that, that's the better improvement you're going to get. I'm not saying that it's a perfect comparison in a perfect world, but there is some benefit to it. Now, all that being said, going back to the conversation, there's some other features that are different. Obviously, Intel supports Optane DIMMs. So that the only way to physically get to 4 terabytes of memory on a Intel board is to use Optane DIMMs, because Optane DIMMs are kind of the in-between between 3D NAND and DRAM.
Well,
they
could do 256 gig DIMMs. That'd give you 4 terabytes.
You could on a 16 DIMM board. Yes. Most people don't make a 16 DIMM board though. But no. I'm talking like in reality though, Intel offers Optane DIMMs for Xeon Scalable, and so let's go to the Xeon Scalable route and have that conversation. So Xeon Scalable can get up to 6 terabytes on a single board with 16 DIMMs. And the way you do that is you can use the 512 gig Optane DIMMs plus some 32, I think it's either 32 or 64 gig DIMMs that you would pair with that for what they call Optane DIMM cache.
Yeah.
And basically it gives cache to the Optane DIMM so that it's the Optane DIMM is slower in general, but it's not so. It's basically like saying that taking a 3200 megahertz Optane DIMM or 3200 megahertz DDR DIMM and then comparing it to a 2666 megahertz DDR DIMM. That's the speed differences. So, I mean, not massive, but not super slow either. Just making everybody aware of that. Now, what does make AMD extremely interesting in this situation, especially with Threadripper Pro, is the big difference between the two is Xeon Scalable, or not Xeon Scalable, but Ice Lake Xeon, whether it's Scalable or W, only has 64 channels of PCI Express. 64 PCI Express lanes.
Gen 4.
Gen 4. They are Gen 4, correct. But when you work with AMD and EPYC or with Threadripper Pro, you get 128. So there is that benefit. If you're somebody who is out there that has to build a rendering farm and you're wanting to put as many cards in as possible, you just got to know it's got to be done with Threadripper Pro. That's really the only way to do that and do it fairly. Mainly just because you don't have the available lanes to you if you don't do it that way. Now, we talk about that. The other thing with Intel, though, is, like I said, the boards are designed a little bit with a few more nice features on board, I believe. You've got more internal USB headers. You've got more USB 3.1 Gen 2 headers. And, of course, your actual outputs, you're going to have, it's always going to be, Intel is just a little more, whatever you want to call it. The only other real difference between the two is the fact that Intel gets Intel still has AVX 512 and AMD has yet to implement AVX 512. So if you have something that uses an AVX 512 workload, Intel's going to be the way to go. The other downside to with the RAM perspective though is channels. So both of these boards support 8-channel memory. All right. So let's say with AMD you want to start with a terabyte of RAM, so you get 8 128 gig DIMMs and you got a terabyte of memory on it. All right. In order for you to upgrade to 2 terabytes of memory, you've got to go out and buy 8 256 gig DIMMs, which are so expensive it's not even worth thinking about. However,
I've looked at it. Don't ask me.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad. About 4 times the price of a terabyte's worth of 128 gig DIMM. So think about it this way: you want to go with you got 8 128 gig DIMMs in Ice Lake Xeon right now. You want to go to 2 terabytes. Guess what? You've got 16 DIMMs. That means you've got 8 spare DIMMs. Just buy 8 more sticks. Just buy another terabyte, which at this point is going to be 1/4 or less than 1/4 of the cost. It's going to be 1/8 of the cost because you're only buying 8 more 1 terabyte DIMMs, 8 more 128 gig DIMMs. Sorry, speaking is hard sometimes. But I mean, it's kind of sad to think about it that way, guys, but that's the truth. Like, Intel is trying to push for major memory component stuff in workstations, and Ice Lake has caught up to Threadripper in terms of it's got more than 32 cores. It's got a higher IPC, so its single threaded IPC is higher than AMD right now. Now, it's not got more cores. You can get 64 with AMD, and that's a big difference, but it depends on your workload. The number of people that really need 64 cores or more kind of blow my mind. Like, I don't know anybody that needs 64 cores or more. It makes more sense to have 32 cores than it does to have 64 right now. I can understand a 38 core spec because it's 6 more cores, but it does make sense to me. But price to performance, once again, the 32 core compared to the 32 core, right now, technically Intel is on top. Shockingly. And Ice Lake is a stopgap for Sapphire Rapids that comes out next year. So, and the only thing out there that's coming for AMD right now is Zen 3, which will pack more performance than Ice Lake. I would think. I think it would I think Ice Lake and Zen 3 will be, for Threadripper Pro, will be on par with each other. But by the time Zen 3 comes out, I think Sapphire Rapids will be out and on the market and making a difference. So it's something we've got to think about. It's all about use cases, though, guys. Once again, you got to know your use case for things. As far as power usage too, Intel actually has varying power usages for their core counts. If you notice, AMD's all are the same, 280. They all have the same TDP for some strange reason. You ever notice that, Chris?
Yeah, I have.
I don't know why.
It's weird. Like I would expect a 3960X to use less power than a 3990.
Yeah, you'd expect the 39. Yeah, but and I think some of that might have to do with the I/O die. I don't know what, but it is. It is what it is. I mean, so there are some things that make no sense about AMD that make some sense about Intel. They use less wattage the lower cores they go. That's a good thing. And that's, once again, it's Ice Lake is the last monolithic die Intel's going to make. Sapphire Rapids, if you've seen the AnonTech articles, Sapphire Rapids is multi-chip, is MCM, which is good. It uses a different kind of interconnect, which is also going to be interesting. And Intel claims that the interconnect, unlike the Infinity Fabric, is a more complete interconnect, which makes sense. Intel took a little more time to research it and do it based on what they saw from AMD, so they kind of had some time to play with it. They've also been lagging behind so much that they just said, you know what, we'll take this time to develop our other stuff. So that's good for Intel. They took the time, they used the research time to their advantage. All that being said, though, there's a lot of stuff coming out there.
That's at the last minute.
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on this before we get into the reality versus expectation. So coming down the pipe, as you've been hearing me and Chris talking about Ice Lake on desktop, that's probably because we're probably going to be putting one together for you guys and giving you a full-on review probably early next year, maybe late this year, depending on when we get everything done. And I have a Tiger Lake H laptop. It's actually the Xeon version, but I've got one of those coming down the pipe that I'm interested to test and compare against everything. Everything. I mean, when it comes to laptop guys, it's shocking to say this, but for as much good as AMD has done in the desktop market, I'm kind of disappointed in the laptop market, especially in the workstation laptop market, because they really haven't. I mean, yes, they pushed Intel to move from 4 cores to 8 cores in laptop. So that's a definite win, right? But outside of 8 cores in laptop, AMD hasn't really made any advancements, and they've never really caught the same, performance level of Intel in a laptop either. Right about the time we thought they were going to catch and really take the lead with Ryzen 5000, Tiger Lake H comes out. And an 8-core Tiger Lake part has just been everything that I can read on it from a benchmarking standpoint. Now, like I said, that's not real. That's expectation. That's not reality. Everything I've looked at and seen from a benchmarking standpoint. That's why I'm looking forward to giving you this reality versus expectation kind of fluff explanation. But everything I've read, you've got a Tiger Lake H laptop that's about 35 to 45% faster than an Intel 10th gen laptop. 8-core to 8-core part-to-part comparison. 30% to 40%, and that's single core and multi-core. So that's a huge uplift, guys. All that being said, that's stuff that's coming up in the near future for you. Just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on it. Looking back, though, now we're going to talk about some stuff we have been looking at in depth. I've been looking at some of these AMD Workstation GPUs, and Chris has been doing all kinds of stuff with storage. And so we're going to start with the storage, storage advertising, marketing fluff versus reality. I kind of touched on it, and I'll give you my thought process to it as well to begin with, and then I really want Chris to dig in and tell you some more about it. But with marketing fluff versus reality and storage, I have PCI Gen 4 cards. I have PCI Gen 3, stuff. I have 10 gig networking to move stuff over them. I can move them from chip to chip. I have yet to hit a theoretical peak in a transfer of over 10 gigs ever. I never hit that high theoretical peak. So that's my reality. I mean, I don't come close to it, guys, just personally. Chris, on the other hand, he gets to play with the benchmarks. So why don't you give us a little bit of information on that?
Yeah, so the benchmarks are What? Focus on your. The benchmarks are always telling you the marketing numbers, like peak numbers and lows, but they're not necessarily telling you the what you're gonna see in After Effects or in DaVinci or in other apps. So while we do run the benchmarks for thermal testing, for bad parts if they die in like an hour, they're not really gonna tell you how is it really gonna perform in all your different little apps and tasks. And talking to manufacturers, it's important they're going to tell you the maximum sequentials, but we need to know what that cache number is, and what are the sustained reads and writes. Doesn't matter if the max read is 7,000 if it's only going to last for like a minute.
And I mean, I think a minute's probably even an understatement of the year. Like, it's 7,000 megabytes a second. If you've got an 8 megabyte cache or an 8 gigabyte cache, 7,000 megabytes is 7 gigs basically in a second. So that cache is filled up stupidly fast. I mean, the reality of it is about all Gen 3 parts. Basically, if you were to go on to Newegg, I'm gonna do it now. So why not? What the heck? Why not go on our excursion? We've already been on excursions today, Chris. Let's continue the excursions.
What is the cache on a 980 Pro 2 terabyte?
It's 8 gigs. 8 gig DDR5 4 cache. So I'm saying.
That's a second. It's gone in a second.
Yeah, that's my point. Like, it's and the thing is, while the Phison controllers can read that stuff, that sustained read write of 7, so for them to say, oh, it can do a sustained read of, and I get sustained reads maybe, but sustained writes they're not that high. So come over here. Let me share my screen again. We're gonna go back to Newegg. We're gonna go to components. We're gonna go to SSDs. We're gonna go to internal SSDs. Browse with me while you do, Chris. All right, so we're going to change to the M.2 form factor so that we get the right stuff. All right. Let the internets of the world work. Shockingly, while we talk about this, Chris, we have dropped a grand total of 10 frames the entire show.
Snap.
Well, compared to last show, that's pretty dang good. So here's really what you're buying. And I think this is, I'm going to go sold by Newegg only because I want this to be the right way to look at this. So when you buy a drive from Newegg, and you're looking at this, and obviously, so the top two results are the 970 Pro Evo Plus, and then the new 980 version, which is QLC, right? So when you look at these two, yes, you get I don't know, maybe it is TLC. No, it may be an update. No, it probably is TLC. It's basically the same thing as the 980, as the old 970 Pro Evo Plus, but for better price because it's the newer version. Yeah, because this is 3-bit MLC. But so, all right, so I do this. So the 980 Pro. Here's where you're really getting when you spend that extra $50 on a 1 terabyte 980 Pro versus the 1 terabyte 980. The extra money that you spend goes to read-write longevity. The drive is going to last longer, guys. They're using better bend parts, just like you get when you get better bend chips. You're getting a better bend CPUs and better bend GPUs. The drives are physically going to last longer for you. they're going to have a better queue depth, and they're going to have a better controller on board. That's the reality of what you're buying, y'all. You're not buying something that's really going to outperform the other thing in, IOPS or queue depth. You're not, the queue depths should be all the same. The only thing is you might have a worse controller on, like 760p, for instance. It's got QLC. It's going to have a slower max read write on Gen 3. That's fine. But the thing is, okay, if its max sequential write is 2.5 gigabits per second, roughly 2.5 gigabits per second, if its max write is that, and its max read is 33.5 gigabits, all right, that's great. That's truly great. But the thing is, the limiting factor is never one drive. It's always going to be every drive in that line. So I showed you guys earlier, and I'll show you again, all the drives that I have. Okay? All those different drives and the amount of storage they have on them. All right? With the exception of my dual SSHDs, which are those Seagate Fire CUDAs from back in the day that had the little 8 gig SSD cache kind of thing on top of them. With the difference of that one, it's a little bit faster than a normal hard drive. My dual 2 terabyte SATA SSDs write to them just as fast as I can write to my dual, and just as fast as I can write to any NVMe drive I have, any dual dual NVMe drives I have. None of them write faster or slower. It just doesn't happen, guys. I've got, an Optane SSD that it writes just as fast to. That's a it's the 905p. It's the fastest drive it's the fastest single drive write speed I have. And maybe that's because it's on a PCI Express setup, and the rest are on the NVMe board and so on and so forth. But guys, realistically, you're not going to beat a pair of SATA SSDs in RAID 0 are probably going to be just as fast write, I should say, and similarly fast reads as a decent 980 regular 980. They're going to be just as fast as a decent regular 980. I'm not saying single, and if you RAID those, okay, you might get a little more performance out of them. But the weakest link is always going to be what is your slowest common denominator. Until you find that slowest common denominator, you're not going to beat that. And to me, the slowest common denominator, like I can write from a 980 Pro 2 terabyte to a 980 Pro 1 terabyte at so that's saying we're going from I have two, because I have one. I have a 980 Pro 2 terabyte and I have a 980 Pro 1 terabyte. And the fastest things that I can write from them in any file size at all, I'm never going to exceed 2 gigabytes per second.
Yeah, I'm looking at sustained sequential write. I'm pretty far in this article on. I found an article on Tom's Hardware on the 980 Pro, and the 980 Pro drops from 5,500 write almost instantly to 1,800. Climbs back up to about 2,200.
Yep.
And then it just stays right there at 2,200. Somehow, the 970 Pro is the fastest thing ever.
Oh, yeah. Would you like to know why?
Sure.
It's short and sweet answer. The 970 Pro is 2-bit MLC.
It's faster than the 905p Optane.
It is. It is because it's 2-bit MLC and the Optane is 3D Crosspoint. So the max sustained reads on Crosspoint are always a little bit slower.
Oh.
But
okay.
But the thing is, a 970 Pro 1 terabyte is, it's like I said, it's 2-bit MLC. When they went to the 980 Pro, they went to 3-bit MLC, which means it's TLC. Now, the reason they did that is they got better yields out of TLC, and they also got better binning, just like anything else. That TLC that goes into a 980 Pro is much better than the TLC that goes into a 970 Pro Evo or 970 Evo Plus. and it's got a better controller on it, so that's why it's faster. But then overall, it's all TLC. And unless you're working with, and that's the reason that the 90 Pro got a 2 terabyte version, is because it was TLC. If it's been MLC, you can't exceed MLC doesn't exceed 1 terabyte drive right now, unless you dual stack it on the front and the back, which they haven't done with Samsung.
Somehow I'm seeing that the 970 Pro 1 terabyte and the 905P basically 1 terabyte are always have the same speed. It doesn't go up or down. It's flatlined.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's because they reached the theoretical peak of PCI Express with latency. So that makes sense to me.
Which, in my mind, that's a fantastic drive because it never changes.
Yep. The problem with the 905P is the cost per dollar. That you know what I'm talking about.
That drive.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible.
Hang on, I'll see if I got one.
It was like.
It's over $1,000, dude.
Yeah. That's like when the 960 Pro 2 terabyte was new, and it was like $1 a gig. Yeah. Same price as when the 950 Pro was new. Ooh, that was $500 for a 500 gig drive.
Intel. Here's the 1.5 terabyte version from somebody random.
The 950 Pro stacks up now. I don't have one, but I would imagine that it's probably either an SLC or an MLC drive. It's probably still pretty quick.
So the MLC, the 905P has a max sequential write of 2,200 megabytes per second on the 905P, the Optane, and that's about the theoretical peak that I think any of them will really have, and that just it boils down to once you get to that point, that's the fastest you're going to get into the MLC, into a 2-bit MLC drive. A SLC drive would be faster, yes, but you're not going to beat that. I mean, the thing is, they didn't have controllers back then, and SLC is so expensive versus MLC.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
950 Pro is an MLC drive. I never got to buy an SLC drive for a customer.
They never wanted one.
Probably couldn't afford one.
Maybe I'll add some of these 1.5 terabyte Intel 905Ps. We can find them from somebody. I love these things. They're so unbelievably fast, dude. It's not even funny.
Well.
Okay. So that's marketing fluff. Storage.
Marketing fluff.
The next thing we're going to talk about, and I'll pull an image of it up so everybody can see it.
GPUs.
So, I have been vehemently testing a AMD Radeon Pro W6800, and I've also had some testing that's been going on, and I'm planning to get some results back for that one too. So maybe I'll do like a full-on standalone video here fairly soon on AMD Workstation GPUs. But I wanted to give some notes and kind of pass along some of the information that I've got from the two. First of all, I want to show you what it is. So this is that's the 6600. This is the W6800. It has 6, and it does have support for 6 display outs, by the way. I've yet to try to figure out how to do that because I don't really want to do that. But 6 display outs. It has 32 gigs of GDDR6 memory, not 6X, obviously. And it is a beast of a workhorse. It very much compares to so in comparison testing, they tried to compare it online. If you read all the reviews, when this launched, you couldn't get an A5000. And to compare it to an A6000 is kind of fun. So I compared it to an A6000, a regular 6000, and an RTX, a Quadro RTX 6000, a Nvidia RTX A6000, and a Quadro and a pair of Quadro RTX 5000s in NVLink. And so Quadro RTX 5000s and NVLink are two 16 gig cards that give me 32 gigs. They don't can perform close to this thing. Mainly because, once again, whenever you NVLink something, guys, you don't get double the performance, obviously, in applications. You get a standard deviation off of that, from my opinion. You probably get maybe 150%, 125%, depending on the application of the actual compute workflow. But where NVLink has its benefits is sharing GPU memory. And so it does help with that. It's not an 100% scalable application-based setup, but it is pretty close. The 32 gigs, though, it really sets it apart. I have yet to get to test a RTX A5000. Maybe I will before the end of the year. I know where the GPU shortage is right now. Trying to get something like that from somebody is quite difficult. And as a matter of fact, getting this W6800 was a challenge too. But I've got notes out the butthole tell me. I mean, if I'm using theoreticals, I have ways to put 38 gigs of or 32 gigs of VRAM on board instantaneously. And guess what? It loads up and it handles it like a champ. It's not got the same smooth performances. So the way I like to do my testing is I'm using point clouds, obviously, guys. And when I load the point cloud into that physical, into the GPU VRAM to run it, the way I look at my testing is how smooth is the actual model as I'm flying through it. Is there screen jutters? Am I seeing frame drops? Things like that while moving around. Is the GPU dropping off? You don't see that with this. Obviously, it's not got the same amount as a 6000, the same amount of VRAM as a A6000, which has 48 gigs. But realistically, this card is, I mean, if I were to probably compare it to a A5000 based on the 24 gig limit in an A5000, it's probably going to fall performance-wise. It won't be as smooth as an A5000 with 24 gigs of VRAM filled up, but it will be as smooth as but it would be able to load more points physically. So I can kind of accept some of those trade-offs. That's always a big thing for us within my industry is whenever you bring in all the points to a W6800, I mean, there's always trade-offs. So the W6800, like I said, it has 6 display outs. It has it's got so much potential to it right now. And I'll try to put solid numbers and frame counts and stuff with some of these testings when I put a standalone video together for it. But it's probably looking somewhere at about 75 to 85% power of the precision power, what it can do of the A6000, which is excellent.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is because in the way it makes up for being, which it's not going to be, which is not so. Everything I've seen is the A5000 is about 85%, and I think this thing's a little bit below that. But for VRAM intensive workloads, this thing is going to be better, way better than an A5000 because you're going to get. You're physically getting 8 more gigs of VRAM versus an A5000. It's also got, it's going to have some of those cool little features of like, especially if you're working with AMD processors, it's got AMD Smart Cache. So where you can share, where you can have the GPU direct from the SSD. It's also got stuff where the cache runs better off the RAM. It's got all of those buzzwordy AMD features that are really cool. Once again, like I said, having 6 display outs, that's something you don't think about. And it is pretty interesting to have that availability. I really ought to try it some.
It also costs quite a bit less.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The A5 or the A6, especially the A6000.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be it's like I said, at 75 to 80% performance, it's probably 5 to 10, somewhere between 5 and 10% slower than the GPU specifically, somewhere between 5 and 10% slower than an A5000. However, it has more VRAM, like I said. So, I mean, that's a trade-off I'm willing to accept when it's approximately the same price as an A5000, depending on where you get it from.
Yep.
But I mean, when it's approximately priced that way, it's a few percentage points slower than the actual performance, but it's got, what is it, 25? It's like 30% more VRAM, 33% more VRAM.
It also looks like it's in stock.
Oh, it's in stock everywhere. It's got like this one right here is in stock, limit 10 per customer.
10? You can buy 10 of that things?
Right now, you could buy 10. Like I said, I think from a rendering perspective, so here's the downsides to it. It doesn't support CUDA, which, hello guys, it's AMD. They don't have CUDA.
Duh.
Shocking. If you have a CUDA-based workload, I wouldn't recommend it to you. I just wouldn't. I would say take your time, go find an A4000, an A5000, work with that. If CUDA is not your problem, right? If you can get whatever you want to get, what I would tell you is this. It is a great card that you can get your hands on. It's not got an NVLink setup. That's the one downside to it. So the perk up to an A5000 is it does support NVLink, and it's the faster NVLink this generation. So you do have that memory sharing across the two of them. I would dare say that A5000 is probably going to be better if you plan to link, like if you're planning to do GPU links inside of like a rendering software. You may find some more benefits to the A5000 in that situation. Mm-hmm. However, like I said, if you're building a workstation, Chris, you should and you and I were kind of starting the conversation earlier tonight with this. If you're building a workstation doesn't need 7 GPUs.
No, it might need
2.
Probably 2. Yeah.
I mean, a workstation doesn't need 7 GPUs. Let's just be real, guys. A workstation needs 2 of a max of 2 of anything. I mean, realistically, if you're putting more than 2 GPUs in there, if you're buying a server board and putting 4 CPUs, you're just doing something. It's not a workstation anymore. I get 2 CPU servers or workstations all the time. That's not a problem. But realistically, 2 GPUs is the max you should ever see. All right. And then we back up and think back about this. You get to, so 2 GPUs are going to interlock with this thing just fine. You're not going to share the GPUs. I did have some difficulty, and this is something that I want to bring up. There was some difficulty I had in my testing of mixing GPUs. So Nvidia has no problem right now. And Intel boards in general, like Intel CPUs and boards, don't have any issue with having different GPUs on board. Usually, the AMD rig that I was using to test this with, because it's PCI Gen 4 and I wanted to test the PCI Gen 4s across each other, I did have issues with having multiple GPUs in there that weren't the same type. And also the drivers for AMD didn't seem to like having 2 different AMD cards in there. So I tried to run the 6600 and the 6800 in comparison, just side by side, to see what would happen. Some people do this. Some people buy and I'll use myself for an example. All right. I put a for years, since I had my Titan, first bought my Titan X Maxwell, I would have one card would primarily run my main monitor and sometimes my secondary monitor, and which I would do all of my physical work on. So everything would be on the main GPU doing that work. And then if I had a spare GPU I wanted to use to monitor frame rates and GPU temps and CPU temps and so on and so forth, that would all be done on a second GPU. Okay. From a display out setup, it would not let me work both of the AMD GPUs side by side. I don't know why, but I'm just letting everyone know that. That's something you can figure out and play with and have some fun on your own. And like I said, I'm the kind of person where here my goal is to tell you everything I know about everything and let you make your own decisions. So that being said, that was the information I found about that. I could not run things like that. And in all likelihood, it's early driver problems. They'll resolve themselves. No big deal down the road. Next up on the conversation's point for this was physically getting things loaded up, and I didn't have any crashes, which is great. It does support ECC memory on board. It does have 32 gigs of ECC memory on board it. Now, I'd tell anybody this, any way you want to think about it. ECC is just like anything else. It's ECC. It's not, if you don't have ECC system RAM, there's no point in running ECC in your VRAM. It's not going to help you any in there. It does have hardware ray tracing support, which is great. It says it's optimized for 8K. Guys, please stop talking about 8K. Like, I made a joke the other day. My boss was like, "Yeah, we still got to buy that new TV for it. We're getting ready to go to a trade show here at the end of the month." And so, if anybody's in Greenville, South Carolina, wants to come to the South Tech Trade Show and meet with me and have a fun conversation about computers on top of the other stuff that I do, I'd be more than happy and love to do it with you. But I say all that to say this: we were jokingly talking about TVs, and the first thing I did, he was like, "Yeah, you got to send me something we should buy for this." The first thing I did was I pulled up an 8K TV and I was like, "Hey, why not one of these, boss man?" He's like, "Huh?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm just messing with you. Nobody cares about 8K right now." And that's the truth. You really shouldn't care about 8K right now, guys. What's more impressive about this machine is the fact that it's got 6 display outs and can handle that much 4K output. I'm trying to remember what this physical. Yeah, it can handle 6 4K displays, 6 5K displays, and 2 8K displays.
Wow. 6 4Ks is impressive.
6 5K is even more impressive to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yes, guys, it has a lower TDP too. Now, the TDP is 250. What's the I can't remember. I think the A6000 is 300 watts. Obviously, the A6000 is 20% more powerful than this thing. 20 to 25% more powerful than this thing. So I expect it to be 20 to 25% more power draw. That doesn't shock me at all. It also has 48 gigs of VRAM. 25% more VRAM. It is. So here, guys, I have to say this because it cracks me up too when you think about it. So it's still only got 33840 stream processors. All right. If this is a running joke within AMD of recent, they can't break the 384 stream processor limit. They haven't been able to bounce through that limit in years. So here's my favorite way to compare this. So it's 32 gigs. It's 32 gig card, and that's great. So I backtrack up and go back and show you this. So I go show you the Radeon Pro. So the 5700 was, don't even think about that one. It only had 2304. The 6600 has 1792. So it's less, but it's actually probably more. The 6600 is more powerful than the 5700. To be honest, it's way better. But so if I go down to the next highest render out for AMD, it was going to be the AMD. Where is it? 38. It's the Radeon Pro 7. Fine, I'll go say AMD. I'll go search by manufacturer AMD.
There was the 9000WX, I think.
No, I don't want to look at that one. I want to look at the 9000WX is technically. I was going to look at so here it is. There's the best example of it. So I go back up here. The 6800 3840, right? I scroll down here to the last Pro launched device, the Radeon Pro 7. 3840.
Oh, yeah, that was the 24 gig card.
No, that was a 16 gig card. The 16 gig HBM card, though. And the Radeon Pro, remember with AMD, you had the Radeon Pro Duo. So it was 2 of these in one with 32 gigs of HBM. So yeah, that was kind of the cool thing. And then now you've got the 6800 over here. That's a pretty cool setup. It's a pretty cool card. I do think that between the W60 and the W66, the nice thing about the W6600 is it's got 4 full-size DisplayPort outs on the W6600. Yes, the W6800 is 6 mini DisplayPorts. That kind of sucks. But it's 6 display outs, y'all. Come on, you're not going to beat that. And the one thing I do like about the 4 display outs on the 6600 is it's a single slot card, just like the A4000.
Yep.
I wish the A2000 had been a single slot card, but I think because of what they're doing with the A2000, they needed it to be double slot for more cooler component dimensions. So they basically could get a bigger cooler on the GPU. That's why it's double slot and half height. They wanted it to be a half height card. That was the thing with the A2000. So there's that. That's kind of some of the cool stuff. So we're going to close this out with a different discussion, though. And we're going to start by letting Chris select one of the ones he wants to do. But so Chris has been putting these together for quite a while because I kept pulling this up in the Teams page, and I kept seeing all these new little things bubbling in. I was like, oh, well, Chris is doing something, I guess. That's kind of cool. What we're doing, though, is Chris is going to be talking. We're starting this conversation on hardware specs for specific software. And it's a new exploration that we're going to do with you guys. And we're going to start doing it at the end of every episode. And then we're going to probably start breaking these out and creating standalone YouTube videos of them from this. But like I said, it's going to be a hardware spec kind of just for specific software. And the reason I think this is important, and, Chris can tell you why he thinks it's important because, it helps sell computers. At the same time, it's actually a smart thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. It's a smart thing to understand why you need certain specs for a certain hardware. And so what we're going to do is we're each this time going to select one of his hardware recommendations for software, and we're going to look at them, and we're going to kind of talk about them. And as these things come out, more in the single standalone videos, what we want is your feedback, guys. What do you see that's different? Because building a computer based on a specific CAD software or specific software in general in the working environment kind of makes a lot of sense. A lot of companies do it. A lot of like the Dells of the world, the HPs of the world, everybody like that. You can find these hardware recommendations based on software. And a lot of what I've found is if you're looking at specific software and you're building a computer for specific software, and you go read that product page's recommended spec or minimum spec, it's laughable. Terrible. It's laughable.
It's like a Pentium with like 1 gig RAM. Like, yes, that runs the app. It fires it up.
Well, I go one step further with your thought process there, Chris. And the step that I go further is not only are they bad recommendations, they're recommendations only for the basic uses of the software.
Yeah.
So if I go, and I'm going to give you a great example of this because I want to use this I'm going to use this as mine. And shockingly, Chris doesn't have this one listed yet, so he's going to have to work on typing it out after he's done. I'm kidding. I'll help him out some. Oh, system requirements. And I'm going to go to Autodesk Inventor. He does have SolidWorks on here, and you could probably just add it to that one.
Yeah, it's Revit, SolidWorks, Inventor, it's the same thing.
Well, you'll never get me to say they're the same thing. They're just close. Okay, so I'm going to go back and share my screen for this so that everybody can see this. So this is Autodesk's recommendations, and I'm going to blow it up so it's easier to see. So Autodesk recommends, or the system requirements, I should say, recommended 3 gigahertz or greater, 4 or more cores. Minimum 2.5 gigahertz. Doesn't tell you a core count. That means that you could buy some cheap little CPU from, whatever, and and yes, it will run on it. Let's backtrack. It will run on it.
Doesn't mean you'll like it.
It doesn't mean that it will run on it well. All right, so memory. It's now recommended to have 32 gigs of RAM. The fact that they all of a sudden are recommending 32 gigs of RAM or more, you're welcome. That's my fault. I pointed it out a long time ago that I could throw monkey wrenches into the software by putting way more than 32 gigs of stuff inside a display window. All right, now this is new, so I'm going to enjoy this. The minimum is now 16 gigs of RAM for less than 500 part assemblies. And I have to say this, I think the reason that they've increased these recently, they used to be 8 and 16 before, but I think the reason they've increased these is because Windows 10 eats up a crap ton of RAM.
Yes.
I have a 256 gig system. All right, I have 256 gigs of RAM. I am not running a lot right now. Just gonna be totally honest with you. I'm not eating up. Okay, all the things that I'm doing. Did I really just open a second? No, it just cracked it. So I'm running I'm not running a whole lot of software right now. I'm personally using maybe 6 gigs of RAM with the few things that maybe 4 to 6 gigs of RAM with the few things I'm running. All right. Just with the background processes of what I have installed on my machine. And I have it minimalistic from startup. So basically it starts up with basically just Windows running and drivers to run the software that I use. So what I mean when I say that is, yeah, it's very minimalistic. And I am using 26 gigs of RAM.
So Brad's doing more than I'm doing. He's running the stream. I have,
which is only using 1.6 gigabytes of memory, by the way. So
I have 3 tabs in Chrome. I have Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitch, and I have Teams, and that's pretty much it. I have some things in the background, but I'm using 9 gigs of 32.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, when I boot up my computer stock, it's 19.
Oh.
Of 256.
So if your computer only had 16 gigs of RAM, it would not work.
Well, it would, because so here's the thing that people forget.
Well,
Windows bases everything on what you have. It wants more RAM to run itself, basically.
Yeah.
So if you've got 32 gigs, here's the stopgap. I've got a rinky-dink work laptop that they gave me years ago that's a thin and light that has 8 gigs of VRAM or 8 gigs of RAM. I can consistently max it out with 7.99 gigs all the time and have it throwing stuff into RAM cache and all that stuff. 8 gigs is no longer viable for Windows. 16 is the minimum I would recommend for Windows, and 32 is the minimum I would recommend for any software package. Anything with any kind of software package that's intensive, even AutoCAD. I would say the machine you have for AutoCAD if you're doing AutoCAD alone, you still need 32 gigs just because of what you're going to be eating up with Windows. You really don't want your RAM to be fully loaded down or even 38, even 3/4 full. You want your RAM to be lower. So we say all that, say this, but just going back once again through Inventor, 4 gigs is a recommendation for a GPU. 4 gig GPU with 106 gigabyte per second bandwidth, DirectX 11. I think I got that with my A6000, pretty sure. 1 gigabyte's the minimum spec with 29. Guys, come on. I mean, I would recommend, like, if I'm being serious, my minimum spec for this would be a W6600 with 8 gigs.
You can't do anything with a gig of VRAM.
I mean, you can trust me. You can run Autodesk Inventor on integrated graphics. It just sucks balls, plain and simple. Here's the certified hardware list if you really want to look at certified GPUs. All right, display resolution.
All right.
The fact that they say 4K, not a fan of that. I think 2K is the sweet spot for Inventor. Or actually, I think 2K ultra wides are the sweet spot for Inventor. 4K is it's a little much. Because you have to display scale to be at 4K, you have to display scale to see the actual stuff pretty easily. Okay.
Right.
This is just some of the stuff that we're covering. It's got all kinds of other stuff for complex models, 3.3 gigahertz, 64 gigs, and a 4 gig GPU. And I go, that's for typically more than 1,000 parts. Who are you? I mean, are you saying? So basically, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, so we're recommending Xeon CPUs now. But 4 cores? You really think 4 cores? I mean, we're going to backtrack onto that conversation later. But
so let's go into
pick yours, Chris, and I'm going to let you talk to yours first.
Let's do Revit and SolidWorks. So if you want to go into that, if you want. So Revit and SolidWorks are single core bound apps. They prefer Intel Intel cores because of AVX 512. AMD just doesn't have it. They work better with Pro GPUs, previously known as Quadro. It's the same thing. 3D can be more GPU intensive, yes. SolidWorks is really only going to be in 3D, so.
Those Revit's 3D too.
This thing with networking, that was a holdover from the later scanning spec. Capable cooling recommended for all specs to hit full performance. Intel runs hot. It just does. So you're going to want a better cooler to make sure that it hits its full boost. Just buy a nice water cooler, it'll be fine. Intel has a better memory controller than AMD. That's a fact. So the level 1 is the 11900K. You can do the 11700K. It's going to be a little bit slower. It's going to cost quite a bit less. It'll be fine. 32 gigs of RAM, not 8 or 16. A 1 terabyte and a 2 terabyte of Gen 4. You can do Gen 3. I think both of our Revit and SolidWorks rigs start with a 500 gig and a 1 terabyte of Gen 3. Gen 4 costs more, and you're not really going to see those advertised speeds as what we said earlier in the podcast.
But it is future-proofing.
It's a good rig. RTX A4000 16 gig. Will you need 16 gigs of VRAM? Probably not. But it's a really solid rig.
I honestly, I foresee getting closer. I know we're talking about Autodesk over here, and this is SolidWorks and Revit. But realistically, you will see more than 4 gigabytes of GPU RAM needed. I would expect to see 8 gigs being the minimum standard pretty soon. Maybe not this year. And see, that's with what Chris has created here. These levels that he's created for you, the basic level is going to future-proof you for a few years. My expectation with software is that when you buy a workstation, your expectation is not that it's going to work for 2 years and then all of a sudden your specs are maxed out. So he's given you enough here to be the standard 3 to 5 year life cycle, and you're good. And level 1 to me kind of hits it perfectly. I'll let Chris go on though.
It's a max of 8 cores. Both Revit and SolidWorks are single core bound, and unless you're doing some sort of heavy rendering, you're not going to need more than 1 or 2 cores. So 8 cores is totally fine. Max 128 gig RAM. That's totally fine. 2 video cards. You're only going to need 1. Dual channel memory, totally fine. Level 2 and 3 both use the X299 platform. This will be upgraded to. I'm not sure how we're going to handle Alder Lake and Rocket Lake. If we're going to change the level 2 and 3 to Alder Lake or wait for Sapphire Rapids, not sure.
I would say that level 1 will change to Alder Lake.
Yeah.
But I would honestly, I would think of that this way. I think level 1 may be like an Alder Lake i7, and level 2 may be the i9 for Alder Lake.
I could see that.
Same kind of setups.
So level 2 is the 14 core i9, and level 3 is the 18 core i9. Really, the main reason why they're here is because they have 256 gig max RAM, which if you need more than 128 gig, that's the only way to go. Because it still has AVX 512. That's literally the only way to go. It does max at 7 GPUs, but you're not going to need more than 1, so who cares? Level 3 has the RTX A5000 because it's the step up. Like if you're buying the 18 core with 64 gigs of RAM, might as well get a better video card as well. And then level 4 is the 16 core Xeon W Ice Lake, because you don't need really anything more than 16 cores. It does have a lot of RAM. I can't do math right now. 8 times 16.
That's 128 gigs.
Okay. 1 and 2 terabyte Gen 4. Don't need more than 2 drives, and Ice Lake is Gen 4. RTX A6000 because it's level 4. We want to get the best card. That makes sense. And then Ice Lake maxes at 38 cores, 4 terabytes, and 7 cards, but you're not going to need any of that. I thought about making a level 5 with Xeon Scalable, but it just didn't make sense.
Nah, you don't.
Because,
so to everybody's understanding with this, parametric solid modeling, which is what you're dealing with, especially with SolidWorks and Autodesk Inventor, does not use more than one. Like when you're physically modeling, it is the fastest single core you can get to. So, shockingly enough, in current markets and current standards, technically Rocket Lake is the fastest single core speed you can get. Now, is that, well, that's not true. Technically, Tiger Lake is the fastest, but that's only on laptop. However, when you get into this, you get further down the line and you get into these, you have jobs that you're doing that take more cores, more RAM, more VRAM, so on and so forth. You're really, in parametric modeling, you're not going to see much more than 16, the 10980XE is there because it's the highest bandwidth machine you can get for the level 3. Yes, it's 18 cores. Yes, it's more than this. Yes, technical level 4 is 16 cores, but the 16 cores on Ice Lake will outperform the 16 cores on Cascade Lake, or the 18 cores on Cascade Lake. It's going to be a step up. You're automatically stepping up to Gen 4 PCI Express. You're stepping up to a lot of other areas that just make total sense. So all that being said, if we pull back and think about it from the overall notes for SolidWorks, Revit, and if you want to talk about Inventor too, realistically, it's the problem with going over to the AMD side of things on this is that there are certain processes that require AVX512. That's the one thing that we'll have to talk about with next gen is AVX512 is dropped from Alder Lake. They had to drop it to do the big little format. So it may be that once again, level 1 is Alder Lake, and then level 2 becomes Sapphire Rapids or Ice Lake or whatever. And maybe level 2 is Ice Lake for a generation or two, and then level 3 is, Sapphire Rapids. Something like that, how the next gens roll in. But when you think about it, guys, the ultimate thing you have to remember is these things, they're not, they get mini core optimized when you do other things with them. GPU rendering is coming, but CPU rendering is how they do everything right now. So you're really bound by what your GPU can do. Revit specifically, and I'll go back to the Revit requirements, so everybody can kind of understand where I'm coming from with this. So Revit's requirements for Revit 22 is they want they even call out that they need 8 gigs of RAM, but they also say that they would, for entry level minimums, that it needs to be a highest CPU gigahertz recommended. They use multiple cores for tasks in Revit, but it's not the same kind of setup. They're still single thread bound in terms of everything. So balanced price performance, they recommend, once again, 16 gigs. I'm telling you guys, this is not the same thing. They don't even call out specific setup. They say highest CPU clock speed recommended. And I sit here and say, okay, guys, that's not going to be the way you have to look at things. Now, they do come up with a they do up their RAM series as they go through that, but they don't call out a better. That I mean, the video adapter never gets better than minimum 4 gigs of memory. Like, guys, understand that you've got to have a better graphics card. Like 4 gigs of video memory should always be a minimum. And if you go look at some of the best ones, like the best ones out there have a video card that has at least 16 gigs of VRAM. Like that's normally like the best you can buy. And once again, if you're buying something to last you 4 or 5 years, that A4000, that's the sweet spot. Just should be. All right. I'm going to back up now, and I'm going to look at this and say, okay, my turn to pick one. And I'm going to do, what do I want? I'm going to pick one that's fun. I'll do laser scanning.
That is, yeah,
that's because that's me.
That's you.
That's because that's me. So that's my setup. So I'm gonna kind of run through these, you know, and it's gonna make people kind of be like, well, what are we talking about this now for? So okay, when it comes to laser scanning, what you have and reality capture at the same time. I mean, I'm kind of covering them both, but laser scanning is the focus of this one. When it comes to laser scanning, once again, there isn't a piece of software out there that has been AMD optimized. AMD's like purely ahead in performance areas in certain features because they just have that much performance to them. So, for instance, doing certain mini core activities, AMD destroys that. Why? Because AMD's CPUs are just that good. All right. So you kind of have to think about the overall thought process to everything else as you run with it, which is where is AMD going to really be the benefit to you? And that's going to be in those upper levels where they're kind of going to be interchangeable with an Ice Lake Xeon, because once you get past that you know level 2, level 3 setup where you're really wanting more you're doing more physical processing and less physical registration of things. Okay, that's a good thing. So the way I always list it is this way. First and foremost, you want to have 10 gig networking with these things. You're dealing with massive files. You're not going to have enough onboard storage to begin with. Don't care what you have on in your device. You're just not going to have enough onboard storage. Like you're going to have to be network storing stuff. That's just how we're going to get to this process. So the start out thought process for him with his level 1 setup for the hardware is that you're going to start with something like an i9 11900K, 11700K, somewhere in that range. You're going to start with 64 gigs of RAM, and that is immediately the starting point. You should never build a laser scanning or reality capture machine with less than 64 gigs of RAM. Just going to call it right out. Same kind of setup. Going to have 2 terabytes of going to have 2 drives. One's a 1 terabyte, one's a 2 terabyte, Gen 4 NVMe, RTX A4000. You can do these with Gen 3. Doesn't really matter. I would also say the same thing in these kind of builds. If you're looking to save a couple bucks, a W6600 is an okay option here too. All right. 16 threads. Obviously, that's, it's going to be faster overall than a lower tier Ryzen 5000, but you could get Ryzen 5000 if RAM latency isn't a concern for you. All right. And what I mean by that is you could go to a 5950X and come out with a little bit better in this level 1 setup, especially if you're doing certain modeling and editing tasks at the same time. All these CPUs are dual channel. Level 2 takes you up to the X299 platform or the STRX40, which is the Threadripper 3000 platform. If you move to those platforms, you're starting off in level 2 with this one with an X299 with a 10940X. It's going to have 32 gigs. It's going to have 4 32 gig RAM sticks for 128 gigs. You're also going to have the same setup where you're going to have 2 drives, one terabyte, 1 2 terabyte, and the A5000. So it's a step up in the GPU in this particular case, and that's probably a good thing because some of these tasks are moving off from a mini core architecture to a GPU compute architecture. So that's something you want to keep in mind. The next up on the list is going to be level 3. But let me backtrack. So if you move to Threadripper 3000, that is an option here as well. Both of these platforms have 256 gig max Both of these are going to have a fairly, low cost and have an overclocking ability to especially if you're on X299. Same thing's going to happen for level 3, which is going to be in the same exact set. They both are quad channel memory, and they're both 2 DIMMs per channel, so you get eight DIMM slots. The same thing in level 3. The only difference is you step up to a 10980, which is currently what I use for everything most of the time. And that's going to have 256 gigs of RAM via 832 gig sticks. Same 1 plus 2 terabyte. So 2 drives, 1 terabyte and a 2 terabyte. 1 terabyte for OS, 2 terabyte for drive storage. And that kind of things, people might think, well, that's backwards. Why not put the 2 terabyte for the OS? No. You trust me. You're going to want the 2 terabyte drive for storage. This one's going to move up to an RTX A6000, which makes a lot of sense here because the VRAM does come into play later on in this process. Yes, you could move to Threadripper 3000, but once again, if you're really in this time slot here for level 3, it's Threadripper 3000. You're going to have so much memory latency to begin with right now. You kind of got to watch yourself. It is still quad channel memory, obviously, with 2 DIMMs per channel. Level 4 and level 5 are Ice Lake Xeon. Level 4 is Ice Lake Xeon W. Level 5 is Ice Lake Xeon Scalable. Both of these.
And at this point, I hadn't actually figured out the processor.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. I can give you the specific differences here on these 2 channels, and I think that's the proper thing to do, is to give the specific differences and not call out a specific CPU to begin with.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to get back into the AVX 512 and memory latency setups. For all these softwares were developed with dual socket potentials in mind. So whether you're working with Leica's Cyclone Register or Register 360 or Ferrocene or Trimble Business Center, they all were developed and thought about back when workstations were primarily dual socket Xeons from Dell, HP, Lenovo, that kind of setup. So dual socket Xeons are not uncommon in workstations. Threadripper Pro has 64 cores, so the older Cascade Lake processors, yeah, you had more cores, but you also lost total memory allotment and total memory and total memory DIMM slots by not being dual socketed. So there was some trade-offs. So if you go with Xeon W in level 4, it's still in single socket mode. Now, yes, the board does have 16 channels, and it does have 2 DIMMs per channel. So you can go way up there in terms of RAM on these boards. It does come with the same 2 drive start. I would recommend when you get to this point, you start looking at more drives. I would say, 1 terabyte for the OS is still fine, but potentially looking at 2 or 3 2 terabyte NVMe drives for your storage pool of data storage as you do that. And then the A6000 still where you're working at here. If you're looking to cut a corner and save some money, you could drop the A5000 in level 4 and save a little bit. Yes, it does have a 4 terabyte max, which is awesome, but not many people will get up and need that. The Xeon Scalable platform is the same kind of setup. Still got a 4 terabyte max. Still got the amount of RAM support. Level 4 is 864 gig DIMMs, which is going to be 512 gigs, and level 5 is 128 gig DIMMs, which is 1 terabyte. The difference between the two is, and the same thing goes for level 5 as level 4. When you're looking at your drives, 1 terabyte for your OS to start is something that's starter only. And then you get multiple 2 terabyte drives to go as your backplane to support storage of things. Eventually, at the higher levels of level 4 and the higher levels of level 5, you are also going to be looking at wanting to have several hard disk drives to long-term store stuff on the machine prior to transferring them over the network. And that's something that, with these cases and builds, you've got plenty of hard drive capacity. You've got plenty of networking to move things around the way you need to. And you've got plenty of storage available with all the channels and setups. So yes, you can put seven video cards in these things, but you really don't need them. There's a lot of options with these motherboards. I would still say that if you're getting to level 5 and you're not putting an A6000 in it, you got problems. That's pretty much the standard. But overall, the options you have available for you in laser scanning are very high. The biggest thing to remember is you want 10 gig networking because you want to be able to get the files off these things pretty quickly. And USB and sometimes just moving a hard drive, external hard drives and stuff like that slow, and having 10 gig networking to a network server, that's the way you want to be about it. So all that has been said, we have talked about laser scanning potentials. We've talked about Revit, SolidWorks, and Inventor type potentials. This has been a very long and drawn out discussion. I'm sure Chris is hungry.
Quite.
I did not expect this to go as long as it did. We've been on here for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and that's pretty impressive. We're going to clip these last two documents out about talking about hardware specs and have a longer conversation about those in a single standalone video. We've also got some reviews. We've also got some other stuff. But Chris, let's sign off, my man. This has been a great stream. Thank those of y'all for watching that want to watch, and thank y'all that watch the video when it's not live. We appreciate it. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye.